I never imagined a single act could change everything, until the day I almost gave up on dreaming. Sometimes life doesn't break you all at once. It wears you down slowly, like a dripping tap that empties the soul, drop by drop. I didn't realize I was already standing at the edge of something extraordinary, disguised as another miserable Monday morning. But that morning, something inside me began to ache differently. Not from hunger, but from hope refusing to die. I've lived most of my life believing the world had already made up its mind about people like me. Nobody. A man who worked hard, paid rent late, and smiled like everything was fine when nothing really was. My parents died young, one from sickness, the other from exhaustion. After that, it felt like the world stopped noticing me altogether. I worked at a delivery company in a city that never slept, but somehow never woke up either. Every day started with the same alarm, the same burnt toast, and the same walk through streets that smelled like gasoline and regret. I was 29, with a high school diploma, no savings, and a mountain of debt that grew faster than my paychecks. Every month I promised myself things would get better. Every month I broke that promise. I used to watch people from the bus window, suits, smiles, and shiny shoes, wondering what it felt like to wake up without fear. Fear of rent, fear of losing a job, fear of dying unnoticed. The only thing that kept me sane was the small acts I did for others. A coin for a beggar, a shared lunch with a coworker, a stray cat I secretly fed behind the warehouse. Tiny gestures that made me feel for a moment like I mattered. The city was merciless. It didn't care that I was kind. When bills came due, kindness didn't count as currency. When the power company cut off my lights, I lit a candle and whispered to myself, "It's just temporary." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That morning, my boss yelled at me for being late. 5 minutes late, because I helped an old woman cross the street. I nodded, apologized, and swallowed the anger like I always did. He said I was too soft for the job. Maybe he was right. But what's wrong with softness in a world built of stone? During lunch, I sat alone on a bench outside the warehouse, eating cold rice from a plastic box. Rain clouds gathered above, the kind that made the city feel even heavier. Across the street, a group of businessmen laughed as they entered a cafe. For a moment, I imagined what it would be like to walk through that door, to have people greet me with respect instead of indifference. Then the thought faded, replaced by the reality of my paycheck and my worn-out shoes. I thought about my mother, how she used to say, "Be good even when the world isn't." She believed kindness always came back somehow. I wanted to believe that too, but lately kindness felt like a curse. No one noticed it. No one cared. When the rain finally started, I didn't run for cover. I let it fall, cold and honest, washing away the dust and the lies I told myself. Raindrops blurred my reflection in a store window. I barely recognized the man staring back. Tired eyes, empty pockets. Hope is fading. But even then, something inside refused to die. A stubborn flicker that whispered, "Keep walking." So I did. Through the downpour, through the crowded streets, through the ache in my legs. I didn't know it then, but each step was leading me toward a moment that would rewrite my entire existence. A few blocks from my apartment, I stopped by a small bakery to warm my hands near the oven vent. The smell of bread mixed with the wet air. It was comforting, almost enough to make me forget how miserable I was. I watched people pass by, rushing home, umbrellas bumping, cars splashing water onto the sidewalks. That's when I noticed him. A figure hunched beneath a broken bus shelter. He looked like a man made of shadows, soaked to the bone, shaking, clutching something close to his chest. No one paid him any attention. People avoided looking in his direction, as if poverty was contagious. For a second I looked away too. I told myself I couldn't afford to help. But guilt has a way of speaking louder than reason. I took a deep breath and turned back. There was something about him, not his appearance, but the air around him. He didn't beg. He didn't move. He just sat there, eyes down, defeated. And something in me cracked. That feeling, that small voice inside that refuses to stay quiet, it screamed, "Do something." But I didn't. Not yet. I just stood there in the rain, staring at him, wrestling with my own selfishness. The warmth from the bakery felt wrong now, like stolen comfort. I didn't know then that this man, this stranger sitting in the rain, wasn't who he seemed. That under those soaked clothes and quiet despair hid a life far greater than mine. A story that would soon collide with my own. If I'd known, maybe I would have acted sooner. Or maybe not. Because sometimes, destiny doesn't show its face until you've already made the choice it depends on. That night, I went home, drenched, tired, and unaware that tomorrow would be the day everything shifted. But as I walked past that bus shelter one last time, I caught his eyes. Just for a moment. There was something in them, something powerful, something that made my heart race without knowing why. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like the world was watching me back. That evening, as I walked home in the pouring rain, I didn't know destiny was waiting at the next corner, dressed in rags, watching quietly, ready to test how much goodness I had left to give. It was the kind of rain that doesn't just fall. It presses down, heavy and relentless, like the sky itself has grown tired of pretending to care. Streets shimmered with reflections of broken lights and hurried strangers, every face hidden behind umbrellas, every heart sealed away from the world. And there, in the midst of that gray and merciless storm, I saw him, a lone figure hunched beneath a dying streetlight, his presence so fragile it felt as if the rain might wash him out of existence. I didn't know it then, but that single moment, that single glance, would unravel everything I believed about fate, mercy, and the price of kindness. The night air tasted of metal and smoke, a mixture of city fumes and forgotten dreams. I remember how my shoes squelched in the water as I walked home, each step echoing my frustration. I had just lost another delivery shift to a coworker who knew how to flatter the supervisor, and my stomach ached from surviving on instant noodles for the third day straight. I wasn't angry at anyone in particular. I was angry at life itself, at how it made goodness look foolish and survival feel like sin. The rain fell harder, thick as sorrow, and through its blurred curtain, I saw him. At first, I thought it was a pile of discarded clothes beside the sidewalk. But then, the heap moved. A faint tremor ran through it, the kind of movement that comes not from life, but from desperation, refusing to die. He sat hunched over, his arms wrapped tightly around a small torn bag, his head bowed so low it seemed as though the ground itself was dragging him down. The streetlight above flickered, painting him in flashes of pale gold and darkness, as if even light couldn't decide whether to touch him. I slowed down, fighting an inner battle that I had fought too many times before. My pocket held just enough money to get me through the next 2 days. I had promised myself, no more helping strangers, no more reckless generosity. The world had taught me that kindness was expensive, and I could no longer afford it. Yet something about him anchored me to the spot. There was no sound from him, no plea, no outstretched hand, just the quiet dignity of someone who had stopped asking, because hope had already stopped answering. Cars sped by, splashing dirty water against his legs. No one looked his way. They didn't even see him, but I did. Maybe because I knew what it felt like to be unseen, to exist in the periphery of everyone else's comfort. My conscience whispered, and I tried to ignore it. I told myself I had done enough for others, that I had earned the right to walk away. But then his hand moved, just slightly, trembling as it clutched the bag to his chest, and that tiny gesture broke through my defenses like light slipping through cracked glass. I turned back, my heart pounding harder than the thunder rolling above us. I stepped closer, the water rising around my shoes, the rain soaking my jacket until I could feel it on my skin. When I finally reached him, I hesitated, unsure what to say. "Sir, are you all right?" For a moment, nothing. Then his head lifted slowly, and I saw his face. His eyes, tired, hollow, yet strangely sharp, locked onto mine. They were the kind of eyes that carried too many stories, too much silence, and a pain that words couldn't hold. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The rain did all the talking for him, falling between us like a veil separating two lives, one barely surviving, the other barely living. Without thinking, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the crumpled notes I had been guarding all week, and sighed. The logic in my mind screamed, "Don't do this," but the ache in my chest overpowered it. I crossed the street to the small diner glowing faintly at the corner, the warmth of its lights mocking the cold night outside. Inside, I bought a cup of hot soup and a piece of bread, the cheapest they had, and carried it back through the storm. My hands shook from the chill, but the thought of leaving him hungry shook me more. When I placed the food beside him, he looked at it as though it were something from another world. His lips trembled before he whispered, "Why?" I had no profound answer, no heroic speech. I just said quietly, "Because nobody else did." For the first time, he smiled, faintly, painfully, but real. As he reached for the soup, his hands trembled, and I saw scars along his wrists, faded but deep. He ate slowly, carefully, as if afraid the moment might vanish if he hurried. When he finished, he looked up again, eyes softer now. He extended a shaking hand toward me. I hesitated, then took it. His skin was ice, but in that instant, something impossible happened. A rush of warmth traveled from his palm into mine, spreading up my arm, pulsing like a heartbeat that wasn't my own. It wasn't heat from his body. It was something else, something alive, something that felt like recognition. When his trembling hand closed around mine, a strange warmth coursed through me, gentle yet powerful, quiet, yet commanding, as though something unseen had awakened inside that storm. I didn't understand it, couldn't name it, but long after I walked away, that warmth refused to fade, lingering like a secret meant to be discovered later, when the truth would finally demand to be heard. I spent my last few dollars that night, not knowing I was buying more than just food. It's strange how fate hides itself inside the smallest acts, how generosity feels ordinary until it reveals its true cost. That night, the rain had softened to a whisper, but something in the air still trembled, as if the city itself knew I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I didn't realize it yet, but I wasn't just feeding a hungry man. I was feeding the beginning of my own transformation. The rain had eased to a drizzle by the time I helped him stand. His legs trembled, and I could feel the frailty in his bones even through the damp layers of his coat. I slipped his arm over my shoulder, and together, we walked toward the dimly lit cafe that stood at the corner of the street, a place I passed every night but never entered because it looked too warm, too bright for people like me. That evening, though, it became our refuge from a world that had forgotten us both. When we entered, heads turned. The scent of buttered bread and coffee mingled with something sharper, the stinging quiet of judgment. The waitress looked us up and down, her polite smile fading when she noticed his ragged clothes. I ignored it, led him to a table near the back, and gestured for him to sit. His movements were slow, cautious, as though every kindness came with a hidden cost. I ordered the cheapest meal on the menu, soup, 2 rolls of bread, and hot tea. The waitress hesitated before writing it down, then left without a word. I could feel every pair of eyes in the cafe resting on us, measuring us, deciding whether we belonged. Maybe we didn't, but for once I didn't care. He sat silently, steam rising around him like a veil. His hands shook as he rubbed them together for warmth. Up close, I could see how the rain had carved lines into his face, deep and uneven, like the traces of a long, unfinished story. He wasn't just hungry. He looked haunted. When the food arrived, he didn't touch it at first. He stared at it, almost reverently, as if he were afraid it would disappear. Then, slowly, he began to eat. Not with greed, but with grace, taking each bite like it meant something. I watched in silence, my own stomach tightening from hunger, but I didn't order anything for myself. I couldn't afford to. After a few moments, he lifted his eyes and said quietly, "You didn't eat." I smiled faintly. "I'm not hungry," I lied. He studied me then, really studied me, not with suspicion, but with a kind of deep curiosity. "You help others often?" "Not really," I said. "Sometimes when I can. My mom used to say kindness finds its way back, but lately I haven't seen much proof of that." He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Maybe it's not about seeing it come back. Maybe it's about believing it will." His words landed heavier than I expected. They didn't sound like the words of a man who'd lost everything. They sounded like something wiser, something tested. He asked me about my life, my dreams, what I wanted beyond the paycheck and the struggle. I laughed nervously, embarrassed to admit how small my ambitions felt. I told him about my wish to start a delivery business one day, something honest that could help others like me. But that dream felt so far. It might as well have been a fairy tale. He listened carefully, nodding occasionally, never interrupting. There was something unsettling in the way he observed me, as though he was weighing not just my words, but my heart. Every time I looked away, I could feel his gaze still on me, quiet but deliberate, like he was searching for something only he could recognize. Outside, the rain tapped, gently on the window, the storm now just a whisper. The other customers had returned to their conversations, leaving us in a small bubble of warmth and quiet understanding. When the plates were empty, I reached for my wallet, pulling out the last few bills. The waitress took them wordlessly, counting twice before walking away. I could almost hear my future slipping away with every note, yet somehow, I felt lighter. As I stood to leave, the man looked at me again, this time with eyes that seemed to hold gratitude and sorrow in equal measure. "Most people," he said softly, "see need and turn away. You didn't. That means something." I shrugged awkwardly, unsure how to respond. "It's nothing, really." He smiled faintly, that same strange smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nothing," he repeated, "is what changes everything." We stepped outside together. The rain had stopped completely now, the streets glistening like polished glass. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. I turned to say goodbye, but he stood still, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the empty road. I offered my hand again. He took it, firmer this time, warmer, and held it a moment longer than expected. His grip carried something I couldn't define, something that made my chest tighten with a mix of unease and awe. As we parted, he smiled faintly and whispered, "You'll see me again, when you least expect it." I watched him disappear into the fog, his silhouette fading like a dream that refused to end, unaware that his promise wasn't a farewell. It was the first warning of the storm that was about to change everything I thought I knew about fate. Kindness didn't pay the bills, and soon I lost everything I thought I had under control. Sometimes, life waits for the moment you feel safe before it reminds you how fragile that safety really is. I believed helping that man had brought me peace, but in truth, it had merely quieted the storm before it came crashing down. In the days that followed, every piece of stability I clung to began to unravel, one thread at a time, until I stood staring at the ruins of the life I thought I knew. A week had passed since that night at the cafe, yet the memory of the stranger refused to leave me. His faint smile, his cryptic words, "You'll see me again, when you least expect it," echoed in my mind like a whisper I couldn't silence. I didn't know why his presence haunted me, He was just a man I had fed. But something about him lingered in the corners of my thoughts, unshakable and mysterious. I tried to return to normal life, but normal no longer existed. The warehouse felt heavier, the routine emptier. My boss, who once ignored me, now watched me with suspicion, finding fault in everything I did. One morning, after a delayed delivery that wasn't even my fault, he called me into his office. His words were as sharp as his cheap cologne. "You're careless, unreliable, and we can't afford mistakes like yours." Before I could defend myself, the decision was made. I was fired. I walked out with my last paycheck, a thin envelope that held more insult than income. The sky outside was pale and windless, the kind of day that didn't even have the decency to look dramatic while your world was falling apart. By evening, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the eviction notice pinned to my door. My landlord had grown impatient with my late payments. I promised I'd find the money soon, but my words sounded as empty as the fridge humming behind me. Each hour dragged like wet sand. The city lights outside blinked like they were mocking me, constant, bright, untouched by my misery. I tried to sleep, but the silence of failure is the loudest kind of noise. The next morning, I packed what little I had left. A few clothes, my mother's photo, and the memory of that night when I thought kindness still meant something. My heart felt heavy, but somewhere deep inside, a strange calm began to grow, as if something was waiting to happen. I stepped out into the street with no destination in mind. The world felt eerily quiet. The usual buzz of traffic had softened into a low hum. I wandered aimlessly through the city, passing by faces that didn't know my name and wouldn't care if they did. I had never felt so invisible, not even when I was poor, not even when I was broken. And then, as if summoned by my despair, it appeared. A black car, gliding to a silent stop beside me. The windows were tinted, reflecting only the gray sky above. My first thought was fear. Debt collectors, maybe, or someone who had mistaken me for another unfortunate soul. The back door opened slowly, and a man in a crisp suit stepped out. His shoes made no sound against the wet pavement, but his presence alone was enough to still the air around us. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Mr. Daniel Hayes," he asked, pronouncing my name with deliberate precision. My stomach tightened. "Yes," I said cautiously. Without another word, he handed me an envelope, thick, cream-colored, sealed with wax. My name was written on it in elegant handwriting, the kind that spoke of wealth and intention. "Who is this from?" I asked. He simply adjusted his gloves and said, "A man who believes you've earned his attention." Before I could say another word, he stepped back into the car. The door shut with a soft click, and the vehicle drifted away, vanishing into traffic like a shadow returning to the night. I stood there, soaked and shaking, the envelope cold in my hands. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single card, thick, smooth, and lined with gold at the edges. In the center, written in graceful ink, were just a few words. Inside was a single line, written in gold ink. "Mr. Stone requests to meet you." I stared at it, my breath caught halfway between disbelief and fear, realizing that fate had finally decided to show its face. And it wore the name of a stranger I thought I'd left behind, in the rain. The man I had helped in the rain now sat before me, in a suit worth more than my lifetime earnings. Life has a cruel sense of irony. It hides its richest truths in the faces we least expect to matter. I had spent nights wondering if I would ever see that stranger again, never imagining that the answer would arrive inside a skyscraper made of glass and money. As I stood before that towering building, heart racing and palms damp, I felt like a man walking into someone else's destiny, a life far too large to fit my small, tired hands. The next morning felt unreal. I hadn't slept all night. That single line, "Mr. Stone requests to meet you," played on loop in my mind. I didn't know who Mr. Stone was, but something about that name carried weight. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a command, cloaked in elegance. I followed the address written below it. Stone Industries downtown, a place I had passed countless times, but never dared to imagine entering. Its mirrored windows stretched into the clouds, catching the morning sun like polished armor. Every step closer made me more aware of the cracks in my shoes and the weariness in my clothes. The receptionist at the front desk greeted me with practiced politeness, her eyes flicking briefly over my cheap jacket. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked. I nodded. She pressed a button on her headset, listened, then said, "Mr. Stone will see you now." The elevator ride felt endless. My reflection stared back at me from the mirrored walls. A man who didn't belong there. When the doors opened, I stepped into silence. The floor was made of marble so clean it reflected the ceiling lights like a second sky. A secretary guided me down a long corridor lined with modern art, the kind you don't understand, but know costs more than your life. At the end of the hallway, she stopped at a set of tall mahogany doors. "He's waiting for you," she said softly, and left me standing alone. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then pushed the doors open. The room was vast, filled with sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. And there, behind a massive desk, sat a man I recognized instantly. The stranger from the rain. But he wasn't the same. The torn coat was replaced with a tailored navy suit, his posture straight, his expression calm and commanding. The exhaustion I remembered was gone, replaced by the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. For a moment, the world tilted. I couldn't move. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe it just looked like him. But then he smiled, the same faint, knowing smile I'd seen that night under the streetlight. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his desk. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes." I sat, trying to steady my breathing, every second stretching like hours. "I'm sure this must feel confusing," he began, his voice deep, steady, the kind that could calm storms or start them. "My name is Alexander Stone." He paused, watching my reaction. "You helped me one night, during a storm. You offered me food when I had nothing. You didn't ask who I was, or what I could give you in return. You simply acted out of kindness." I couldn't speak. My mind was spinning. The man I thought was homeless, the man I had pitied, was a billionaire. The realization hit so hard it felt almost cruel. He leaned back, studying me. Most people stepped around me that night. Some even mocked me. But you stopped. I managed to find my voice. "Why were you there? Why pretend to be?" I stopped myself, unable to finish. He smiled faintly, as though expecting the question. "I was looking for something money can't buy," he said. "Honesty. Compassion. The kind of humanity people lose when the world gives them too much." His words settled into the room like quiet thunder. I could feel the sincerity in them, but also the weight. A mystery behind his calmness, a reason deeper than charity or gratitude. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. "Do you know how many people I employ, Mr. Hayes?" he asked softly. "Thousands. And yet in all that success, I find fewer and fewer who remember what it means to care without profit." When he turned back toward me, there was something almost vulnerable in his eyes. "That night, you didn't just feed a stranger. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten about myself." I sat there, silent, overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all. The man who could buy anything had found meaning in an act that cost me everything. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he walked back to his desk, picked up a folder, and placed it in front of me. Then he leaned forward, his gaze fixed on me with unsettling intensity, and said, "I've been searching for someone like you, and I think you're the one." The room seemed to close in, the air charged with a promise I didn't yet understand. I didn't know whether to feel chosen or trapped, only that my life, once again, was about to change beyond recognition. He didn't offer me money. He offered me purpose, the kind that scares you more than poverty ever could. When you've lived your whole life, surviving from one paycheck to the next, the idea of being trusted with something bigger than yourself feels both intoxicating and terrifying. I had walked into Alexander Stone's office expecting gratitude or charity, maybe a check to ease my misfortune. But what he offered instead was something far heavier, a responsibility I wasn't sure I was strong enough to carry. I sat in silence, staring at the folder he'd placed before me. Its weight felt disproportionate to its size, like it carried more than just papers, maybe fate itself. Mr. Stone stood behind his desk, calm and patient, as if he had all the time in the world. The city glittered behind him, reflected in the glass like a second universe. "I want to make you an offer," he said finally. His voice was steady, each word deliberate, as if crafted to leave no room for misunderstanding. "Not because you helped me, but because I saw something in you that night. Something rare." I opened the folder hesitantly. Inside was a letter embossed with gold, the logo of his charitable foundation gleaming at the top. The Stone Foundation for Human Betterment. My eyes skimmed the lines. Position title: Personal Coordinator for Outreach and Ethics Programs. And then the number beside annual compensation. My throat went dry. "This can't be real," I murmured, more to myself than to him. He smiled faintly. "It's very real. The foundation works on large-scale humanitarian projects, shelters, education, community reforms. I've built it to help people who still believe in doing good without expecting applause. People like you." I stared at him, my heart thudding with disbelief. "But I have no degree, no experience in any of this. I don't belong in a place like that." He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Hayes. You belong wherever honesty still means something. Skills can be taught. Integrity cannot." His words struck something deep within me. For years, I had worked jobs that treated me like a replaceable part, never as a person. Now, a man whose name carried power across continents was telling me that I, a nobody, was worth trusting. It felt unreal, too good to be true, and that made it even more frightening. "Why me?" I asked quietly. He took a deep breath before replying, his voice soft but certain. "Because when the world looked away, you didn't. Because you gave without expectation. Because you reminded me that compassion still exists outside of boardrooms and balance sheets." I wanted to speak, but emotion clogged my throat. I looked down at the contract again, tracing my fingers over the bold letters that bore my name. It felt impossible, as though I were reading the beginning of someone else's story. "Think of this not as a job," he continued, "but as a chance. I don't hire based on resumes. I hire based on who people are when no one is watching. That's the only measure that matters." There was no arrogance in his tone, only conviction. I believed him, though part of me still trembled under the weight of the unknown. My life had always been predictable in its struggle. Success, on the other hand, was a landscape I had never walked. I took a long breath. "If I accept," I asked, "what exactly would you expect from me?" He smiled again, not kindly this time, but knowingly. "Honesty, loyalty, the courage to make difficult choices. You'll see things most people never do, and not all of them will be beautiful. But if you stay true to who you are, this opportunity will change you in ways you can't imagine." There was something almost prophetic in his tone, as if he were warning me and preparing me all at once. I nodded slowly, the decision forming before I could stop it. "All right," I said. "I'll do it." He extended his hand. The moment our palms met, I felt the same faint current I'd felt that night in the rain. Warmth, calm, something unexplainable. He gestured toward the contract. "Then sign it." I hesitated for one final heartbeat, aware that my old life was dissolving behind me with every second I delayed. Then, with trembling fingers, I picked up the pen and wrote my name. As the ink dried, Mr. Stone's expression shifted. The faint smile deepened, touched with something unreadable, something almost secretive. As I signed the contract, he smiled and whispered, "Welcome to the real test." His tone was soft, but beneath it was a weight that made the room feel colder. I looked at him, unsure whether he was offering me a future or a trial, realizing too late that every test worth surviving begins the moment you think you've already won. Wealth has a smell, expensive, cold, and intimidating. I could feel it clinging to me as I entered my new world. It wasn't the scent of comfort or safety, but of polish and pressure. A fragrance that whispered you didn't belong unless you could afford the air you breathed. The day I stepped into Mr. Stone's foundation as an employee, not a beggar, I thought I was walking into success. But what I didn't realize was that wealth shines so brightly, it can blind you long before it welcomes you. The first morning I reported to the Stone Foundation felt like stepping into another universe. The building towered above the skyline, its glass walls catching the sun in a way that made it look less like an office and more like a cathedral dedicated to power. I arrived early, wearing the only suit I owned, a cheap one that hung awkwardly on my shoulders, but still made me feel like a stranger who had borrowed someone else's life. The lobby was a vast sea of marble and whispers. Every surface gleamed. Every sound was soft and calculated. Every person moved as though they'd rehearsed being important. I followed a young assistant named Clara through long corridors filled with art that probably cost more than my entire apartment building. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the floor, echoing like a countdown to the moment I'd be found out for being an imposter. "Your office is just here," she said with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Stone will meet you later in the day." My office was larger than the entire apartment I'd been evicted from. A mahogany desk faced a wall of windows overlooking the city. The chair, the lighting, even the smell of the room screamed refinement. But beneath that perfection, I felt small, a misplaced piece in someone else's grand design. Throughout the first week, I tried to adapt. I attended meetings where people spoke in numbers that made my head spin. I sat in banquets filled with laughter that didn't sound real. I watched as million-dollar deals were discussed like grocery lists. Each day, I learned that success had its own language, a mix of confidence, cruelty, and charm. I didn't speak it fluently, but I was learning. Mr. Stone remained a distant but constant presence. He rarely spoke to me directly during the day, yet I could always feel his eyes on me. Calm, observant, measuring. He'd pass by, nod slightly, and move on, leaving behind a silence that carried both approval and warning. It was as if he were waiting for something, testing whether my humility could survive luxury. One afternoon, I joined him for a meeting with potential donors, men and women whose laughter was as sharp as the diamonds on their wrists. Mr. Stone introduced me simply as a man I trust. That single phrase sent a wave of murmurs through the table. They looked at me with thin smiles, the kind that hid their questions behind politeness. I realized then that trust, in his world, was the rarest and most dangerous currency of all. At night, when I returned to the small company apartment he had arranged for me, I'd stand by the window, looking down at the glittering city lights. The streets I once walked barefoot through the rain were now far below me, both physically and emotionally. I was surrounded by comfort, yet lonelier than I'd ever been. The quiet of luxury was deafening. It made me miss the noise of struggle, the simple sound of my own survival. There were moments when I caught glimpses of Mr. Stone's humanity. A fleeting smile to a janitor, a moment of stillness in his office as he stared at an old photo on his desk. But those moments were rare, swallowed quickly by the commanding version of him that the world knew. He began involving me in projects that required discretion, reviewing donation requests, visiting charity sites, and reporting what I saw. It felt noble at first, meaningful even, until I realized how much power came with deciding who deserved help and who didn't. The line between compassion and control blurred with every file I read. Sometimes, during meetings, I'd catch Mr. Stone studying me the same way he had that night at the cafe. Eyes searching, patient, calculating. There was something behind that gaze, something unspoken. I couldn't tell if it was pride or suspicion, mentorship or manipulation. One evening, after another long day of balancing between admiration and discomfort, I stayed late to finish some reports. The office was quiet, except for the low hum of the air conditioning. From my desk, I could see the glow of Mr. Stone's office down the hall. The door slightly ajar, light spilling across the carpet like liquid gold. As I gathered my papers, a sound caught my attention. Voices, low but distinct. I moved closer without thinking, my curiosity stronger than my caution. Through the narrow opening, I saw Mr. Stone standing with two of his executives, their faces tense, their tones urgent. I caught one word that froze me in place. My name. I leaned slightly closer, heart pounding, the hum of the building fading into silence. One night I overheard my name in his office, and what I heard made my heart drop. The tone in their voices wasn't praise, it was calculation, the kind reserved for pieces on a chessboard. I stepped back, pulse racing, realizing that maybe I wasn't being groomed for success. Maybe I was being prepared for something far more dangerous. It wasn't a promotion. It was a trap disguised as opportunity. And I walked right into it. The higher I rose inside Mr. Stone's world, the more I realized that every door opened for me came with an invisible string attached. When he handed me control of a multi-million-dollar charity fund, everyone congratulated me as if I had won something extraordinary. But deep down, I felt the cold breath of danger curling around the edges of that success. I didn't know it then, but this was not an advancement. It was the beginning of the most dangerous test of my integrity. After that night outside Mr. Stone's office, the atmosphere around me changed. The whispers in the hallway grew quieter when I walked by. The friendly smiles of my colleagues turned into polite nods. Something had shifted. I could feel it, though no one dared to say it aloud. A few days later, Mr. Stone called me into his office. The same wide windows bathed the room in gold, the city sprawling beneath us like a living map. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Daniel," he said evenly, "you've proven yourself trustworthy. I'm giving you full oversight of the new Global Relief Fund, $72 million allocated for housing, education, and food programs." My breath caught. 72 million. The number didn't even sound real when he said it out loud. He continued, "You'll review proposals, authorize transfers, and manage approvals. I trust you'll handle it with the same honesty that brought you here." His gaze lingered on me for a heartbeat longer than comfort allowed. I nodded. Words caught in my throat. When I left his office, a storm of emotions followed me. Pride, fear, disbelief. I could feel every eye in the corridor tracking me as I walked back to my desk. Word spread fast, and before the end of the day, everyone knew that the new guy, the man who came from nothing, had been handed the keys to a kingdom of money. At first, it felt empowering. My name appeared on documents beside figures that could change entire communities. I attended meetings where my opinions suddenly mattered, where executives leaned forward when I spoke. But soon, the congratulations turned into quiet suggestions, the kind wrapped in smiles that didn't reach the eyes. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," one senior manager said after a board meeting. "There are processes we follow. Shortcuts, let's say. Everyone benefits, no one loses." He slid a folder across my desk, its pages full of polished lies and inflated numbers. I flipped through it and asked, "You want me to sign this?" He chuckled softly. "It's already been approved upstairs. We just need your name to make it clean. You'll understand how things work soon enough." That night, I went home, restless. The papers waited on my desk like loaded traps. I stared at the city lights from my window, trying to remind myself why I took this job in the first place. To do something good, something real. But the deeper I went into this world, the murkier goodness became. The next morning, I returned the file unsigned. His eyes hardened behind his glasses, the smile gone. "You're making this complicated, Daniel," he said quietly. "I'm following procedure," I replied. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "Procedure doesn't build empires." After that, the whispers grew louder again. My coworkers stopped inviting me to lunch. Projects were pulled from my control without explanation. It was as if the building itself had turned against me, glass walls reflecting not success, but isolation. Weeks passed, and the pressure mounted. The charity fund began moving money faster than I could trace it. Documents arrived late at night for my approval, rushed and incomplete. Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right. Then one evening, Clara, the assistant who had once welcomed me on my first day, appeared at my door, pale and anxious. "They're saying you're slowing progress," she warned quietly. "Mr. Stone's watching how you handle this. Be careful." Her words rattled me. Was this another test? Was Mr. Stone orchestrating this tension on purpose, or had I become a pawn in a game too big to understand? That night, another document arrived. Authorization for a large transfer to a company I'd never heard of. The signatures of other executives were already there, waiting for mine to complete it. My hand trembled as I held the pen. Something inside me refused. I couldn't sign. I couldn't stain the one thing that had always been mine: my integrity. I placed the pen down, locked the document in my drawer, and turned off the light. The office fell silent, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound. As I walked out, my reflection in the glass wall looked like a stranger's, tired, tense, but unbroken. When I refused to sign one document, I didn't realize I had just declared war against the powerful. The next morning, the warmth in every greeting vanished, and in its place came the kind of silence that warns you the wolves have noticed your heartbeat. I thought I was protecting my honor, but, in truth, I had just threatened their empire. They say a lie can ruin a lifetime of truth, and I learned that the hard way. Integrity had been my only shield in a world built on power and deceit, but I never realized how fragile that shield truly was. It doesn't take betrayal from an enemy to destroy you. All it takes is silence from those you thought would stand beside you. The day the walls of Stone Foundation turned against me was the day I understood how quickly admiration can turn into accusation, and how alone a man becomes when honesty threatens profit. After that night when I refused to sign the forged document, the office atmosphere changed completely. Smiles became scarce, handshakes lost their warmth, and the space around me grew heavier with unspoken judgment. The same people who once praised my integrity now watched me with the cold curiosity reserved for someone standing on a trap door. A week later, it began. A simple email flagged urgent: financial discrepancy in Fund 12. At first, I thought it was another clerical error, but when I opened the attached file, I saw it. A transaction record bearing my digital signature, approving a massive transfer to an offshore account I had never heard of. My stomach twisted. I knew instantly what it meant. Someone had used my name, my access, my trust. Within hours, whispers spread through the building. Meetings that once included me continued behind closed doors. Documents that should have been on my desk vanished overnight. The very foundation I helped protect was now treating me like a stain to be scrubbed away. By noon the next day, Clara appeared at my door, her face pale and eyes full of pity. "They've called an emergency board meeting," she said softly. "You should prepare yourself." Prepare myself? For what? For a war I didn't start? For a punishment I didn't deserve? The boardroom was colder than usual that day. Mr. Stone sat at the head of the long glass table, expression unreadable. Around him, the directors whispered among themselves like a jury, waiting for the judge's nod. The CFO stood and began reading from a document, a detailed report of irregularities traced back to my credentials. Screens displayed numbers, transfers, signatures, all pointing to me. My face stared back at me from those projections like a ghost being tried for its own haunting. I stood to defend myself. "This isn't me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Those records are fabricated. I've never seen those accounts in my life." A murmur rippled through the room. Someone muttered, "Convenient denial." Another scoffed, "He had access, didn't he?" I turned toward Mr. Stone, searching for some sign of trust, the same trust he had once spoken of with reverence. But his eyes were cold, distant, unreadable. "Sir," I said, my voice cracking, "you know me. You tested me. You've seen who I am." For a long, unbearable moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, he replied, "I thought I did." The words hit like a blow. No shouting, no accusation, just disappointment. The kind that hurts more than rage ever could. They escorted me out before the day ended. There was no trial, no chance to clear my name, only the silent judgment of people too afraid to question authority. As I passed through the lobby, the receptionist who once greeted me daily refused to meet my eyes. Even the guards averted their gaze. Outside, the sky had opened up again. Another storm, as if the heavens themselves couldn't bear to watch. I stood beneath the downpour, the building behind me gleaming with the same perfection that had once made me feel proud to belong. Now, it felt like a monument to everything I had lost. I walked with no destination, the rain masking the tears I refused to admit were falling. Every step echoed the same question. Why didn't he defend me? Has this been another test? Or had I simply become expendable the moment I refused to be corrupted? The streets blurred through the rain, neon lights bleeding into puddles at my feet. People passed me by, their umbrellas forming a wall of indifference, the same wall I had once broken through to help a stranger. How ironic, I thought bitterly. Kindness had been the reason I met Mr. Stone. Now it was the reason I had been destroyed by him. I reached the bus stop, the same one where I'd first seen him months ago, and stood there, in silence. The rain soaked through my clothes, the chill biting into my bones. Around me, life continued indifferently. As I walked away from that building in the rain again, I swore never to trust kindness, not even my own. The storm roared above me, but inside there was nothing left to break. I didn't know it then, but this fall wasn't the end of my story. It was only the moment destiny stripped everything away to see what remained beneath the wreckage. Weeks later, when I was living out of a shelter, that same black car appeared again, and I froze in disbelief. The engine's hum cut through the drizzle like a ghost from a past I'd buried under anger and humiliation. I had convinced myself that chapter of my life was over, that Mr. Stone had turned his back on me for good. But as the tinted window rolled down and the same suited driver stepped out into the rain, I felt a strange mix of fear, fury, and hope twist inside me. Whatever this was, it wasn't a coincidence. It was destiny returning for its unfinished business. 3 weeks had passed since my world had collapsed. I had gone from luxury apartments and marble floors to a cot in a crowded shelter on the city's edge. The night smelled of sweat and despair, and the only warmth came from the stories of broken men who spoke in whispers about the lives they used to have. I kept mostly to myself, replaying the moment of my downfall over and over, until I couldn't tell if I hated Mr. Stone for betraying me or myself for ever believing in him. The days blurred together. I searched for work, but found only locked doors and polite rejections. Once people see a stain on your name, they don't ask if it's true. They just assume it's permanent. My savings were gone, my pride long stripped away. Every night before sleep, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how one act of goodness had somehow led me here, to this place where even the stars seemed to avoid shining. Then came that morning. The rain had returned, a cruel reminder of the night I first met him. I was standing outside the shelter, clutching a paper cup of cheap coffee, when I saw it. A black car, gliding slowly to the curb. The same one that had found me months ago. The driver stepped out, his movements as crisp and deliberate as before, and called my name. For a moment, I couldn't move. Every muscle in my body tightened, torn between running and facing whatever waited. He handed me a folded envelope, sealed with the same gold-embossed insignia, A. Stone. Inside, a single line, "Come see me." My chest tightened. My first thought was rage. How dare he summon me like I was some pawn he could move at will? But beneath the anger was something else, a whisper of curiosity, maybe even hope. So, against my better judgment, I went. The drive felt longer this time, not because of distance, but because of the memories that filled every passing street. When the car stopped in front of the tower, the same marble building where I had once belonged, I hesitated at the entrance. The receptionist looked startled to see me, but didn't stop me. Clearly, she had been told to expect my arrival. When I stepped into Mr. Stone's office again, everything looked the same, except him. He stood by the window, not in his usual composure, but quieter, older somehow, as though carrying a weight that had finally bent him. "Daniel," he said softly, turning to face me. "I knew you'd come." I stared at him, my voice rough. "Why call me back now? Haven't you done enough?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit." I remained standing. He sighed, then said words that made the air in the room grow still. "Everything that happened, the project, the accusations, even your dismissal, was part of a test." I blinked, stunned. "A test? You ruined my life for a test?" He nodded slowly. "I needed to know who you truly were when the world turned against you. I could have cleared your name at any moment, but integrity isn't proven when someone defends you. It's proven when you stand alone." His calm tone enraged me. "You let them destroy me, humiliate me. You watched." "Yes," he said quietly. "And you never lost yourself. Even in the face of betrayal, you didn't lie, you didn't beg, and you didn't bend. That's what I needed to see." My hands trembled. I didn't know whether to feel proud or sick. The man I had admired had orchestrated my downfall like a puppet master pulling strings just to test my honesty. He walked closer, his expression softer now. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I know what I put you through was cruel, but it was necessary. I couldn't trust anyone else with what comes next." "What comes next?" I asked, my voice hollow. He turned, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick folder bound in leather. He placed it on the desk between us. "This," he said, tapping it gently, "is everything I've built, every project, every plan, every dream that matters. It's time for someone else to take it further." I stared at the folder, then at him, unsure whether I was hearing an apology or another manipulation. His eyes met mine, steady, remorseful, and full of something I hadn't seen before: humility. He handed me the folder and said, "It's time for you to lead what I started." The words hung in the air like a final verdict, heavy with redemption and responsibility. I didn't know whether to trust him or walk away, but one thing was certain. This was not the end of his test. It was the beginning of mine. For the first time in my life, I was rich, but not with money, with meaning. I had known the taste of hunger, the humiliation of failure, and the silence of betrayal. But now I was finally tasting something purer: purpose. When Mr. Stone handed me that folder, I thought he was giving me a job. What I didn't realize was that he was handing me the power to rebuild lives the way mine had been torn apart. Yet even as I began to rise, I would soon learn that purpose, too, can become a prison if you forget who you were before you found it. The transition happened slowly, like dawn creeping across a bruised sky. At first, I couldn't believe Mr. Stone's offer. After everything, the accusations, the exile, the shelter, it felt impossible to trust him again. But the sincerity in his eyes disarmed me. I saw no trace of the cold businessman who had once orchestrated my destruction. Instead, there was an aging man desperate to make amends before time ran out. Within a month, I was officially appointed as Director of Global Operations for the Stone Foundation. Overnight, the world that had rejected me began to open its doors again. My face appeared in magazines and interviews. The story of the man who rose from nothing became an inspiring headline. People who had once looked through me now looked up to me. And though their admiration felt hollow, their respect gave me something I'd never had before: the chance to make real change. I poured myself into the work. Every project, every visit, every signature mattered. I traveled to cities and villages across continents, to slums where children played in dust, to hospitals where patients slept two to a bed, to refugee camps where hope was a luxury no one could afford. Everywhere I went, I saw versions of myself, people who only needed someone to believe in them the way no one had believed in me. Each act of kindness I initiated felt like a thread mending the tear in my soul. When we built shelters in Kenya, I thought of my nights on the shelter cot. When we funded food programs in Mumbai, I remembered the night I shared my last meal with a stranger in the rain. Every decision I made carried the echo of my own past. Under my leadership, the foundation flourished. Donations multiplied. Governments partnered with us. Journalists called it a new era of ethical philanthropy. And through it all, Mr. Stone watched quietly, his health fading, but his pride evident. He would sometimes visit the office, his once commanding presence now softer, like a mentor watching his legacy breathe in another man's body. One evening, during a private dinner, he said something that stayed with me. "Daniel," he murmured, his voice frail but steady, "do not let the light blind you. You started with kindness. Make sure you end with it, too." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. I was too busy, too consumed by the growing empire of good I was building. But in hindsight, I realized he was warning me that the same pride that corrupts the powerful can just as easily corrupt those who believe they're saving the world. Months passed, and the lines between service and success began to blur. My decisions grew bolder, my tone more commanding. I was no longer the uncertain man from the shelter. I was a leader, a visionary, the face of compassion. But with every headline, every applause, a small part of humility slipped quietly out of the room. People began treating me the way they once treated Mr. Stone, with reverence, with fear. Assistants moved quickly when I spoke. Executives waited for my approval before they breathed. I told myself it was respect, but deep down, I knew it was power. And power, even when born from good intentions, always asks for more. One morning, after a long flight back from a humanitarian summit in Geneva, I stood in my penthouse bathroom, exhausted but restless. The city stretched endlessly beneath me, sunlight bouncing off towers that glistened like mirrors of ambition. I turned on the tap, splashed cold water on my face, and lifted my eyes to the mirror. For a moment, I didn't recognize the man staring back. The expensive suit, the sharp expression, the confidence that bordered on arrogance. It all felt foreign. Then it hit me with quiet horror. The man in the reflection looked nothing like the one who had once stood in the rain offering food to a stranger. He looked like Alexander Stone. But one morning, as I looked in the mirror, I saw a reflection that scared me. A glimpse of the man I once pitied. The same ambition in his eyes, the same detachment in his smile. And as I stared at myself, a chilling thought crept in. Maybe this was the real test all along, not to rise above my past, but to remember who I was before success began to erase me. Years later, when I saw another poor man in the rain, my heart recognized him before my eyes did. It wasn't his face or his clothes that stirred something inside me. It was the silence, the same kind I had once seen in Alexander Stone, and before that, in myself. The world around me had changed. I had changed. But that night, as the storm returned to the city like an old ghost, I realized some moments aren't meant to end. They come back to remind you who you were and who you're still meant to be. Time had reshaped everything. Years had passed since Mr. Stone's death, since I'd taken over the foundation and carried his legacy forward. The organization had grown beyond anything he or I could have imagined. We had built schools where there were once ruins, hospitals where there were once graves, and hope in places the world had forgotten. I had become what people called a symbol of kindness. But titles have a way of dulling the truth. Behind every speech, every handshake, and every smiling photograph was a man who still carried the weight of his mistakes, the pride, the doubt, and the haunting question of whether I'd truly changed or just learned to hide my flaws behind generosity. That night, the city was drenched in rain again, the kind of rain that blurred time itself. I was returning from a charity gala, dressed in a black suit that cost more than what I once earned in a year. My driver was waiting near the curb when I noticed him, a man sitting alone on the sidewalk, soaked, shivering, and invisible to everyone rushing by. Something inside me stopped. It was as if life had folded back on itself, presenting me with the same scene I had lived years ago. A stranger in the rain, unseen by the world, waiting for someone to see him. The resemblance was uncanny, the same helpless stillness, the same quiet despair. I told the driver to wait and stepped out into the downpour. The cold struck my face, sharp and honest. As I approached, the man lifted his head, startled. His eyes were tired, lost, eyes I had seen before, in mirrors, in memories, in ghosts of my former self. "Sir," I said softly, crouching beside him, "you shouldn't stay here in this weather." He blinked, hesitant, as if he didn't believe the offer was real. "I'm fine," he mumbled. "Don't trouble yourself." But I could hear the hunger in his voice, the same tone I once had when pretending to be strong while falling apart inside. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my wallet, and handed him a card. "Come to this address tomorrow morning," I said. "Ask for me. We'll get you something warm to eat, maybe even work if you're willing." He stared at the card, his hands trembling. The rain trickled down his cheeks, disguising his tears. "Why are you helping me?" he whispered. I smiled faintly. "Because someone once did the same for me." He nodded slowly, gripping the card like it was a lifeline. As I turned to leave, a faint echo of my younger self followed me. The boy with wet shoes and empty pockets who had once stood under a streetlight, offering food to a stranger. When I sat back in the car, the driver glanced at me through the mirror. "Everything all right, sir?" I looked out the window, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. "Yes," I said quietly. "Everything's exactly as it should be." But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that someone was still watching me. I glanced back toward the sidewalk, but the man was gone. Only the empty spot remained, as if the rain had washed him from the world. Or perhaps he had never been there at all. A chill ran through me. For a moment, I thought about Alexander Stone, his calm eyes, his knowing smile, the lessons he had taught me through pain and loss. Maybe this was his way of reminding me that destiny never ends. It only circles back, testing if we remember the truth it once revealed. When I reached home, I stood before the mirror again, just as I had years ago. But this time, I didn't see ambition staring back. I saw peace. The kind that only comes after losing everything, finding yourself, and realizing that every act of kindness is a conversation between the past and the future. That night, as the rain whispered against my window, I thought of the man I once was, desperate, lost, yet stubborn enough to care. Years ago, I thought I was saving a poor stranger in the rain. But now, standing in the quiet glow of everything that moment had created, I finally understood the truth. He was the one who saved me from myself. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Share it with someone who still believes kindness can change lives. Hit the like button if you've ever felt unseen, but kept going anyway. Subscribe to the channel for more real, soul-stirring stories that remind us what it means to be human. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done that night in the rain?